The year is 1973, the 6th of October. Over the bleached, sun-scorched expanse of the Sinai Desert, an Egyptian pilot, call sign Talon 3, feels a cold prickle of sweat trace its way down his spine. He is flying low, dangerously, terrifyingly low. His Mi-G-21 fishbed, a jewel of Soviet engineering, screams across the sand at over 500 knots. His knuckles are white inside his gloves, his eyes scanning not the empty sky above, but the jagged horizon ahead. This is the doctrine, this is the plan. Soviet instructors had drilled it into him for months. The Israelis, with their American-made Phantoms, rule the sky above 10,000 feet. Their radar is powerful. So, you do not go there. You fly under it. You fly in the clutter. Clutter. It is the tactical godsend, the physical law that keeps him alive. On the green glowing radar scopes of the Israeli fighters and their ground controllers, the earth itself is a deafening roar. The energy from their radar beams splashes against mountains, dunes and buildings, bouncing back in a chaotic, meaningless storm of green static. A tiny, fast-moving fighter jet flying inside that storm is invisible. It is a needle in a haystack made of needles. To the phantoms hunting above, he is a ghost, he is safe. His wingman, Talon 4, is a phantom shape 50 meters to his right. Their mission, a low-level strike on an Israeli armored column. The ground controllers, their voices laced with the clipped, confident Russian of the Soviet advisors, are his true eyes. They paint a picture of the sky for him. Talon flight, the GCI crackles. Continue vector 090. Airspace is clear. I repeat, clear. Clear. He breathes. He focuses on the horizon. 10 minutes to the target. Then a sound. It is not the familiar, low-pitched growl of his own radar. It is not the human voice of his controller. It is a sound he has only heard in simulations, a piercing, high-frequency shriek. It fills his helmet, an electronic scream of pure malice. His blood turns to ice. His eyes snap to the small, dark panel on his right. A single amber light is flashing. Lock on. Impossible. He yanks the MiG into a hard left bank, his G-suit inflating, crushing his legs and chest. His eyes sweep the sky. Nothing. Blue. Empty. Infinite. Hostile blue. Talon 4. Brake. Brake left. Where are they? His wingman's voice, tight with panic. I see nothing. GCI, I have a lock. Where is the bandit? Talon 3 screams into his mask. The controller's voice is no longer calm. Talon 3, negative. There are no bandits in your sector. There is. Wait. We show 2 contacts. But they are high. Angel 20. 20,000 feet. They cannot see you. Repeat, they cannot see you. The shriek in his helmet becomes a solid, unwavering tone. The sound of death. Chaff! Flares, he yells. But he knows it's too late. He looks to his right, just as a white-hot spear, trailing a thick ribbon of smoke, climbs up from the clutter. No, not up. It's coming down. It isn't aimed at him. It strikes Talon 4's Mi-G-21 directly amidships. The jet, a machine of 3,000 kilograms of metal and fuel, does not spin. It does not fall. It simply ceases to exist. One moment, it is a fighter plane. The next, it is a rapidly expanding cloud of orange fire and black, vaporized fragments. The shockwave hits Talon 3's jet like a physical hammer, tossing him violently. It doesn't hesitate. He firewalls the throttle, dumps his ordnance, and dives, pushing his nose down until he is barely 20 meters above the desert floor, praying the radar that guided that missile cannot follow him. He does not stop until he is back over the Suez, his fuel tanks on empty, the ghost tone of the lock-on still ringing in his ears. The debriefing room at the airbase is thick with cigarette smoke and fear. The Egyptian commanders are silent, their faces ashen. The Soviet advisory team, led by a hard-faced polkovnik, a colonel from the PVO, the Soviet Air Defense Forces, is in charge. The polkovnik paces, his boots loud on the concrete floor. The GCI tapes are replayed, over and over. Here, the polkovnik snaps, jabbing a finger at the green-black radar display. This is us, Talon flight, 500 feet. He points to 2 other blips, faint and high. And this is the enemy. 4 phantoms. Altitude, 22,000 feet. He rewinds the tape. The Egyptians are in the clutter, The phantoms are high. They are in the blue. At this moment, the American radar, and he says the word with a sneer, is pointed down. It is looking at the ground. He slams his hand on the console. So, what does it see? It sees this. He gestures to the chaotic, flickering grass at the center of the display. It sees the Sinai. It sees hills. It sees static. It is physically impossible for them to distinguish a MiG from a sand dune. This is a law of physics. The young, surviving Egyptian pilot Talon 3 speaks. "Colonel, it locked onto me. It came from above." "The tapes are clear," the polkovnik shouts. "They fired from 20,000 feet. They shot down into the clutter." "How? How did they see you? Was it a spy on the ground? A visual lucky shot?" "No, Colonel," the pilot says, his voice quiet, trembling. "It was not luck. The tone was solid. It was a hard lock. They saw us on their radar. They saw us when we were blind. They were hunting us from a place we thought was safe." A cold silence fills the room. The implications are catastrophic. This incident, and hundreds like it, sent a shockwave of pure, undiluted panic through the entire Soviet military establishment. This was not a tactical setback. This was a doctrinal collapse. The entire Soviet strategy for a ground war in Europe, a strategy that hinged on massive, low-flying air support to overwhelm NATO positions, was now, potentially, suicidal. Their entire air defense network, a multi-billion ruble shield of interceptors and ground-controlled radar, was predicated on that one, simple, immutable fact. Low-flying planes are invisible to high-flying planes. And that law had just been broken. If you want to understand the hidden technologies and secret battles that defined the Cold War, you are in the right place. Subscribe to Cold War Impact as we uncover the stories of the weapons and the warriors that held the world in a delicate, terrifying balance. For the Kremlin, this was not just a mystery. It was an existential threat. A phantom had appeared over the battlefield, a phantom that could see in the dark, a phantom that could look through the earth itself and pluck their pilots from a sanctuary that no longer existed. The order was given, from the highest levels of the KGB and the GRU. Find out what this ghost is. Is it a new type of radar? A new missile? Or is it, as some frantic pilots claimed, something else entirely? The race was on, not just to understand this new American weapon, look down, shoot down, but to find a way to counter it. Because if they failed, every MiG pilot in the Warsaw Pact was flying on borrowed time. The Kremlin did not tolerate mysteries. It solved them, or it buried the people who failed to. In the winter of 1973, as the snows deepened in Moscow, a special high-priority commission was formed. It had no official name, but in the whispered corridors of the Ministry of Defense, it was simply known as the Clutter Commission. This was not a low-level engineering review. This was an inquisition. On one side of a vast, polished wooden table sat the marshals of the Soviet Union, men with chests full of medals earned at Stalingrad and Berlin. Opposite them sat the chief designers of the aviation bureaus Mikoyan, Sukhoi, Yakovlev, and the heads of the electronics institutes, the men responsible for every radar, every vacuum tube, every diode in the Soviet arsenal. The air was frigid, and not just from the Moscow winter. "Explain," one marshal, a hero of the Great Patriotic War, demanded, his voice a low gravel. He held up a grainy, after-action photograph of a blackened crater in the Sinai sand. All that remained of a Mi-G-21. This pilot was at 100 meters. The enemy was at 7,000. How did they see him? A nervous, balding engineer from the Phasotron Design Bureau, the heart of Soviet radar development, cleared his throat. "Comrade Marshal, as we have stated in our reports, it is a physical impossibility. The problem is the main lobe clutter. When a radar antenna is pointed at the ground, the energy that reflects from the ground itself is 1 million times? 10 million times? More powerful than the echo from a small fighter aircraft." He was visibly sweating. To find a MiG in that noise would be like trying to hear a man's whisper standing next to a roaring jet engine. The signal is drowned. It is lost. This is not opinion. This is physics. "Then your physics is wrong," the marshal roared, slamming his fist on the table. "Or, this is not radar." The room fell silent. What do you mean, Comrade Marshal?" "I mean," the marshal said, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing, "that our pilots are being shot down by a phantom, and you, our best and brightest, are telling me it is a ghost. I do not accept impossible. I accept we have been outthought." He turned to a GRU colonel, a man who sat in the shadows at the end of the table. "What has our intelligence found?" The GRU man spoke softly, but his words carried. "Our assets in the West are confused. They report chatter, but no specifics. The Americans call this capability look down, shoot down, a simple, arrogant name. We have acquired AM maintenance manuals for their 4E model Phantom. The radar is the Westinghouse AN divided by APG 66. We are analyzing it now, but the documents we have do not describe this capability. They describe a powerful but conventional radar, one that is just as blind to ground clutter as our own." This was the great, paralyzing fear. The Americans had not just improved a system, they had broken a system. The Clutter Commission's directives flew out across the Warsaw Pact. Every encounter, every rumor, every snippet of pilot debriefing was to be collected, collated, and sent to Moscow. A vast, paranoid bureaucracy mobilized to hunt for a single, terrifying signal. Soviet interceptor pilots, the elite Vojska PVO, were given new, desperate orders. If they encountered American fighters, they were to provoke them, fly at them, tempt them, and try to capture the emissions of this new ghost radar on their own warning receivers. The results were a disaster. Over the Baltic Sea, in 1974, a flight of Soviet Su-15 Flagons rose to intercept what they believed was a standard NATO reconnaissance flight. Instead, they were met by a flight of US Navy 4J Phantoms from the carrier America. The Soviet pilots, eager for data, descended, attempting to fly below the Americans to force them to look down. They were not prepared for the speed of the American response. The Soviet flight leader, a veteran with over 1,000 hours, suddenly heard the same terrifying shriek that his Egyptian comrades had described. His RWR, his radar warning receiver, lit up with a symbol he did not recognize. A new, unknown threat code. "Evasive," he commanded, pulling his Flagon into a gut-wrenching climb. But as he looked back, he saw his wingman, flying 2 kilometers distant, already trailing smoke. A missile, which he had not even seen launched, had found its mark. He did not see the phantom that fired it. He only saw the empty sky above, and the burning wreck of his friend falling into the grey, cold sea. The mystery was deepening. The legend was growing. This was not a weapon. It was witchcraft. Inside the Soviet pilot-ready rooms, the bogeyman now had a face. It was the face of the 4 Phantom, a jet they had previously understood. A jet they had met in combat over Vietnam and the Middle East. And while it was good, it was beatable. But this was a new animal. Pilots began to share stories. A Hungarian pilot claimed a Phantom had locked him from behind a mountain. A Polish pilot swore one had tracked him through a thunderstorm. These were exaggerations, born of terror, but they pointed to a horrifying truth. The old rules were dead. The Soviet scientific establishment, pushed to the breaking point, began to grasp at straws. The wrong conclusions became doctrine because the truth was simply too far-fetched. Theory 1. The brute force method. This was the engineers' first, most logical assumption. They have not solved clutter, the phasotron designers argued. They have simply overwhelmed it. The theory was that the American radar was so astonishingly powerful, its transmitter so massive, that its signal was stronger than the ground reflection, that it was like a lighthouse cutting through a fog. This was comforting, in a way. It meant the Americans were just using a bigger hammer. The problem? It was physically impossible. A radar that powerful would require a dedicated nuclear reactor to power it. It would melt the nose cone of the aircraft. This theory was quietly discarded. Theory 2. The tattletale drone. This theory gained significant traction within the GRU. It is a trick, the intelligence officers argued. The 4 itself is not looking down, it is blind. But it is working with a partner. The idea was that the Americans were deploying small, high-altitude, stealthy drones. These drones would fly above the low-flying MiGs, track them with their own radar, and then beam that targeting data in real time down to the killer Phantoms. The 4 was just a dumb missile truck, taking orders from an invisible eye in the sky. This was a terrifying but plausible scenario. It meant the Americans were masters of data linking and stealth technology far beyond anything the Soviets possessed. Entire air defense regiments were retasked, their radars sweeping the high-altitude bands, searching for these non-existent, tattletale drones. They found nothing. Theory 3. The infrared heresy. This was the most radical and most feared theory. What if it wasn't radar at all? Over Vietnam, the Americans had introduced the AIM-9 Sidewinder, a missile that tracked the heat of a jet's engine. It was a terrifying weapon, but it had a weakness. It was rear aspect. You had to be behind the enemy to get a lock. But what if, a young, ambitious designer from the Wimpel Bureau proposed, they have perfected it? What if their new missile can see cold? He was describing a new generation of infrared sensors, so sensitive they didn't need the blazing heat of an engine exhaust. They could see the heat of the pilot's face through the canopy. Or, more likely, the subtle temperature difference created by air friction on the leading edge of a MiG's wing, even as it flew low. This theory was the most terrifying of all. Radar could be jammed. It could be tricked with chaff, but you could not hide friction. You could not hide the heat of your own existence. If this were true, there was no defense, there was no counter. The only solution was to not fly at all. This infrared heresy led to a frantic, multi-billion ruble push to develop low observability paint and to experiment with cooling the leading edges of their jets, all in a desperate attempt to blind a weapon that did not exist. The Soviet war machine, the most powerful on Earth, was now shadowboxing. It was spending its treasure, wasting its time and terrifying its own pilots, all in a desperate attempt to explain a single, impossible sound in a dead pilot's helmet. They were hunting ghosts, because the reality of the American project was so far outside their own technological imagination, it was, quite literally, unthinkable. They were looking for a new type of magic, not realizing the Americans had simply become masters of the magic they already knew. While the Clutter Commission met in the freezing, paranoid halls of Moscow, the men responsible for their terror were working in air-conditioned laboratories in a place that couldn't be more different: Southern California. The Soviets were hunting for a ghost. But the project's origins were not in an act of aggression, but one of desperation. The answer was not in the Sinai Desert in 1973. It was in the skies over North Vietnam, 8 years earlier. The year was 1965. Rolling thunder. American 4 Phantom crews, the self-proclaimed kings of the sky, were being humbled. They were being hunted. Their Phantoms were designed for one thing: high altitude, high-speed interception. They were armed with powerful new Sparrow missiles, guided by the most powerful airborne radar ever built. They were designed to find and kill Soviet bombers in the blue at 50,000 feet. But the North Vietnamese, guided by their Soviet advisors, refused to fight that war. They did the exact same thing the Egyptians would do later. They flew low. A typical engagement was a nightmare for the Phantom crews. They would be feet dry over North Vietnam, flying high and fast, their powerful radars pointed down, seeing nothing but a chaotic, green-fuzzed mess of ground clutter. They were blind, and from that static, a tiny, fast-moving shape would suddenly climb up at them, like a shark from the depths. A MiG-17 or MiG-21, its cannons flashing. The Vietnamese pilots, guided by ground controllers who could see the high-flying Phantoms clear as day, would execute a perfect low-to-high ambush. They would get in close, inside the Phantom's minimum missile range, and tear them apart with World War II-era cannons. The Americans were losing planes. They were losing pilots. The kings of the sky were being bled by an enemy who was exploiting a single fundamental weakness. The most powerful radar in the world was rendered useless if it was pointed at the ground. In 1967, the order came down from the Pentagon with the simple, brutal clarity of a failing war. Fix it. Fix it now. I don't care how. Find a way to see in the clutter. The problem was handed to the brilliant but rival engineering houses of Westinghouse and Hughes. The task seemed, as the Soviets had correctly concluded, physically impossible. The ground's reflection was millions of times more powerful than the echo from a MiG. The first attempts were, as the Soviets guessed, brute force. They built more powerful transmitters. It didn't work. It was, as one engineer put it, like trying to find a match flare in the heart of the sun by making the sun brighter. The wrong path was a dead end. The solution had to be different. The breakthrough did not come from a bigger transmitter. It came from a new idea. The idea was born in a quiet laboratory, Not with a bang, but with a complex mathematical equation. It was called the Doppler effect. The principle was simple, as old as the universe itself. It's the reason a train whistle sounds high-pitched as it comes towards you and low-pitched as it moves away. The motion of the train compresses and then stretches the sound waves. The Westinghouse engineers, working on a new radar they called the AN divided by APQ-120, asked a revolutionary question. What if we stopped looking for a blip and started listening for a whistle? The ground, the mountains, the buildings from the perspective of a fast-moving phantom, all of that clutter is moving away at a single, predictable speed. It has a single, massive, low-frequency Doppler tone. It's a deep, booming bass note that drowns out everything else. But a Mi-21, flying low, head-on to intercept, it is moving towards the phantom. Its radar echo is not the same. It's compressed. It is blue-shifted. It has a different tone, a high-pitched, insistent shriek. The Soviet engineers had been right. It was like trying to hear a whisper next to a jet engine. Their mistake was that they stopped there. The American engineers decided to build a filter. This is where American ingenuity, fueled by the white-hot revolution in microelectronics, changed warfare forever. They designed something that the Soviets, still reliant on vacuum tubes and heavy analog systems, could not even comprehend: a digital signal processor. It was a primitive computer, a box of wires and circuit boards that, by modern standards, is less powerful than a pocket calculator. But in 1970, it was magic. This magic box was given a single ruthless instruction. Listen to the world. Take every single radar echo that returns. Now identify that one massive low-frequency bass note of the ground clutter and delete it. In one elegant, complex-as-hell piece of code, the American engineers did the impossible. They taught a computer to make the entire planet Earth invisible. The first time they tested it was at a secret range over the desert. A test pilot, his voice trembling with excitement, called back to the control room. I don't believe it. The ground is gone. My scope, it's just black. It's clean. Okay, test pilot. The engineer's voice crackled back. Now look for the target. We have a drone flying at 500 feet. The pilot was silent for a moment. Holy, his voice was a whisper. I see him. I see the drone. He's a bright, shining light. I have a hard lock. It's like he's the only thing in the sky. This was the source of the ghost. It wasn't a new missile. It wasn't a stealth drone. It was an IV Phantom, flying high and safe in the blue. But now, when its pilot pointed his radar at the ground, he didn't see a storm of green static. He saw a pristine, black, God's eye view of the battlefield. And against that pure black, the tiny, fast-moving blip of a low-flying MiG. A blip with that unique, high-pitched Doppler whistle. It shined like a star. The Americans had not just built a better radar. They had built a smarter one. They had taught a machine to see the motion of the enemy, not just his shape. This was look down, and now they could pair this revolutionary new eye with their most reliable killer, the AIM-7 Sparrow missile, a weapon that had been frustrated by the clutter problem for years. Now, it was unleashed. The radar would lock onto the blue-shifted target, feed the data to the missile, and fire. The missile would ride that beam, ignoring the ground, ignoring the chaff, ignoring everything except that one unique Doppler signature. It would scream down from the heavens and strike a target whose pilot, right up until the moment of his death, was utterly convinced he was invisible. This was shoot down. The Soviets were hunting a monster. The Americans had just given their pilots a scalpel. And now, over the deserts of the Middle East, they were about to use it, with devastating, terrifying precision. The mystery of the ghost radar did not end with a single dramatic breakthrough. For the Soviet High Command, the truth arrived not as a sudden flash of light, but as a slow, agonizing, and humiliating dawning. It was a truth built from 1,000 fragmented reports, from the panic in their pilots' voices, and, most devastatingly, from a single act of betrayal that would expose the rot at the heart of their entire system. The date was September 6th, 1976. At the Hakodate airport in northern Japan, civilian air traffic controllers were staring at their radar screens in stunned confusion. A massive, unidentified aircraft was descending from the sky, without a flight plan, without a radio call. It was a fast mover, It was in fact one of the most secret and feared objects in the entire Soviet arsenal. A MiG-25 Foxbat, the crown jewel of the Soviet air defense forces, touched down with a shriek of tires, rolled off the end of the runway and buried its nose in the soft earth. The pilot, Senior Lieutenant Viktor Ivanovich Belenko, shut down its two massive Tumansky engines, the most powerful jet engines in the world, and climbed out. He had just delivered, intact, the bogeyman of the Western world. The Americans, who had spent a decade terrified of this very aircraft, were on the scene within hours. They descended on the MiG-25 like priests, opening a forbidden tomb. This was their confrontation. This was their chance to finally see the monster that had haunted their nightmares. And what they found was not a monster. It was a relic. The shock moment was, at first, entirely American. They had expected a lightweight titanium superfighter, a MiG in the nimble, deadly tradition. Instead, they found a 36,000-kilogram beast, built not of titanium, but of welded steel. They had expected advanced, miniaturized avionics. They found a cockpit dominated by primitive knobs, gauges, and, to their utter disbelief, vacuum tubes. The radar, the mighty Smerch-A, was the most powerful airborne radar they had ever seen, a behemoth of analog technology. But it was just that, a brute, a clutter-blind giant. It was, as one astonished engineer put it, from the 1950s. This was the great, lumbering giant the Soviets had built to counter the American high-altitude threat. It was designed to do one thing: get to 80,000 feet, fly at Mach 3, and fire enormous missiles at an American B-70 Valkyrie bomber, a plane that was never even built. It was a jousting lance, forged for a tournament that had already been cancelled. But the real shock, the one that would break the Soviet mystery, came in the debriefing rooms as American intelligence officers sat down with Belenko. They laid out their own technology, they explained their own doctrines, and then they showed him the data from the AN divided by APQ 120. They showed him, look, down, shoot, down. Belenko, the elite product of the Soviet system, stared at the clean, black radar scope, the scope with the ground deleted, and his blood ran cold. He knew, of course, that the phantoms were deadly. He knew of the ghost signals. But he, and the entire Soviet military establishment, had assumed it was Theory 1. They believed the Americans had simply built a bigger, more powerful Smerch-A of their own, a radar so powerful it could burn through the clutter by sheer brute force. He could not comprehend what he was seeing. "The ground, where is it?" he reportedly asked, his voice a whisper. "We filter it out," the American officer explained, as one might to a child. "The computer, it just ignores it. The computer." In that one word, the entire, horrifying truth of the previous decade was laid bare. The Americans were not building bigger hammers. They were building smarter ones. Belenko's defection, and the subsequent rape of the MiG-25 by Western intelligence, was the moment the Soviets' investigation finally led to the truth. And it was a truth far more terrifying than any of their theories. It was not a drone. It was not a heat-seeking missile. It was a digital signal processor. It was a chip. It was a line of code. And it had rendered their entire air defense philosophy, the philosophy that had produced the mighty, steel-clad MiG-25, completely, totally, and humiliatingly obsolete. The Soviet response had always been the futile response. The MiG-25 was their answer. And it was the wrong answer, to a question the Americans were no longer asking. The Foxbat was the ultimate expression of the old war, the war of altitude and speed. Its pilots were trained to climb like rockets, lock onto high-flying, non-maneuvering targets, bombers, and get out. But the Phantom was now the master of the new war, the war of information. The Soviet pilots, in their clutter-blind MiGs, were still forced to fly low to hide from ground radar and high-altitude interceptors. But that sanctuary was now the Phantom's killing field. A MiG-25 pilot forced to look down for and for was just as blind as the Egyptian MiG-21 pilot. His massive Smerch-A radar would be completely filled with a blinding storm of ground clutter. He was a deaf, dumb, and blind giant, and the four, flying high above him, would see him as a single, perfect blip against a clean black screen. The Foxbat, the great Soviet superfighter, could fly at 3 times the speed of sound, but it could not hide. It could reach the edge of space, but it could not see a plane flying in the weeds. The Soviets had built a shield, but the Americans had built a weapon that simply passed through it. The shock was absolute. The Americans had not just won a single engagement. They had lapped the Soviet Union in the one area that now mattered most. Not metallurgy, not engine power, but computing. The Kremlin's bogeyman was not a plane. It was a small box of circuits that could think, and in doing so, had left the most fearsome air force on Earth fighting shadows. The numbers do not just tell a story, they deliver a verdict. When the dust settled from the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the final tallies were sent to Moscow. The Soviet advisors, the polkovniks, who had insisted on the low-level doctrine, were the first to read them. They read them, and they, perhaps for the first time, understood the abyss that had opened beneath their feet. The kill ratios were not just lopsided, they were a joke. Over the Sinai and the Golan, the look-down, shoot-down capable four Phantoms of the Israeli Air Force had engaged the very best of the Soviet-supplied, Soviet-trained Arab air forces. The final score was apocalyptic. For every one Phantom lost in air-to-air combat, 42 MiGs and Sukhois were shot from the sky. It was a massacre. But even that staggering number hides the killer statistic. It hides the true technological gap. The real number, the one that kept Soviet marshals awake at night, was this one, 0. During the entire conflict, not one Israeli 4 Phantom was shot down by an Arab fighter while the Phantom was at a higher altitude. Read that again. The sanctuary was absolute. The low to high ambush, the tactic that had bled the Americans white over Vietnam, was dead. The digital signal processor had not just won a battle, it had erased the enemy's entire playbook. The ghost had become a god, and it had passed a terrible, unassailable judgment. This one technological leap, this magic box, did more than just win an air war. It exposed the fatal systemic flaw at the heart of the entire Soviet experiment. It was the moment the world saw the devastating difference between imitation and innovation. The Soviet system was the greatest imitation machine ever built. It was a marvel of industrial espionage. The GRU could steal anything: blueprints for a nuclear warhead, a jet engine turbine blade, a radar housing. And the vast, centralized industrial apparatus could copy it brilliantly. The MiG-25 was the perfect example. The Americans were building the SR-71 and the B-70, so the Soviets built a counter. They stole the idea, and they built a steel-welded vacuum tube-powered answer. They imitated the what, but they could not under any circumstances imitate the why. The AN divided by APQ-120, the look-down, shoot-down radar, was not a thing. It was a thought. It was a creative, lateral leap born from a specific, desperate problem. It came from a culture where a young engineer in a lab in Southern California could tell a 4-star general, "Your physics is right, but your question is wrong. Stop trying to find the needle and just delete the haystack." That culture, that spark, could not be stolen. It could not be copied. It could not be mandated by a 5-year plan. The Soviet Union had built an entire military-industrial complex to answer the last war. They were masters of steel, of brute force thrust, of massive, powerful dumb radars. Their entire system was designed to build a better version of what they already had. But the Americans, they had built a system to invent what no one had ever imagined. When Viktor Belenko, the defector, told his debriefers about the MiG-25, he revealed that its vacuum tubes had to be hand-built and hand-tuned. The system was so archaic, it was artisanal. In that same year, American engineers, the children of the Apollo program, were already etching microscopic logic gates onto silicon. They were building the future, one line of code at a time. The Clutter Commission in Moscow had failed because it was asking the wrong question. It was asking, how powerful is the American radar? It never occurred to them, not even for a moment, to ask, how smart is it? The 4 Phantom, a machine of the 1950s, would continue to serve, its lethality extended by decades thanks to a small, magic box. It became the symbol of a new kind of warfare, a warfare based on information. The Soviet Union, in contrast, was broken by the revelation. They would spend the next 15 years and hundreds of billions of rubles they did not have in a frantic, desperate chase to catch up. This chase would produce new fighters. The MiG-29 and the Su-27, brilliant machines in their own right, fighters finally capable of look down, shoot down. But by the time they arrived, it was too late. The race had already been run. The economy that had been bled dry to build them was a hollow shell. The true Cold War impact was not measured in megatons or throw weight, it was measured in megahertz. In the end, the Cold War was not won by the B-52, or the Trident submarine, or the Moan tank. It was won by a small team of anonymous engineers who faced an impossible problem, the problem of clutter. They didn't just solve it, they used it as a weapon. They weaponized the laws of physics. They taught a machine to see a whisper in a hurricane. And in doing so, they rendered the entire Soviet military blind, deaf, and terrified. The sound that echoed in that Egyptian pilot's helmet in 1973, that high-pitched digital shriek, it was not just the sound of a missile lock. It was the sound of an empire beginning its long, inevitable fall.